folks. Welcome to As Above, So Below Tarot. Today we are going to be looking at the Magus or Magician card. We're going to be focusing primarily on Aleister Crowley's rendition of this card, or else this video will be an hour long. We will be checking out other variations, but only insofar as they're interesting, you know. So I want to open this up by reading a passage from the Book of Thoth by Aleister Crowley. So this is page 72. This is sort of the last bit of the last paragraph he wrote on the Magician card. Okay. So, no true image is possible at all, for firstly, all images are necessarily false as such, and secondly, the motion being perpetual, and its rate that of the limit, c, the rate of light, any stasis contradicts the idea of the card. This picture is therefore hardly more than mnemonic jottings. Many of the ideas expressed in the design are well expounded in the extracts from the Paris working, which of course is in the appendix. Not in the appendix, but you know. So, Aleister Crowley wrote 4 pages on this card in the Book of Thoth, whereas, you know, on the Fool he wrote about 20 pages. It's because the Fool had a lot of sort of easy symbolism to write a lot of words about. But for, you know, a high degree spiritual teacher, master, there are secrets in this card which people of that nature are not really comfortable talking about. Because A, it would make them sound crazy, and B, you know, it's theirs. It's their little secrets. So these little fraternal boys clubs, they just love stuff like that. See Golden Dawn, see OTO, see the Illuminati, whatever. Okay, so the Magus. What do we have here? We have a god juggling a coin, a wand, a cup, a sword, a winged egg, which symbolizes the 5th element, the ether or spirit. These elements are basically his playthings, and he delights in this. He smiles as he rearranges the very fabric of being for the sake of it. He is doing what he does, and he pays no mind to you. So there's our first thing we want to note. This is entirely separate from us. This thing, Aleister Crowley said it's impossible to comprehend it. He, like I said, he gave us barely 4 pages on it in a book which is supposed to be the written authority on this deck. So right out the gate, we know that the Magus is probably the most complicated and difficult card in the tarot system, especially if you're trying to understand it from an esoteric perspective. You know, you want to know its meaning with more depth than what it represents to a querent, looking for answers about a job interview or about love. But here's what shows up in the sidebar on Google when searching this card. And I quote, "When the magician appears in a spread, it points to the talents, capabilities, and resources of the querent's disposal to succeed. The message is to tap into one's full potential rather than holding back, especially when there is a need to transform something." Now, transformation is a big part of magic. In the alchemical sense, one of the earliest ideas was transforming lead into gold. And there are a lot of alchemical, tarot is almost entirely alchemical since it's built around the alchemical elements of, fire, water, air, and earth. Now, this is a good interpretation if you are looking at it on a very, very, very mundane human level. But to me, it's just representative of someone holding back and not really talking about this card the way it should be talked about. Like, discussions about this figure are not happening in the way that I think they should be happening. For one, we have to think about the principle of vibration. We have to think about the foundational aspects of our ability to communicate, and the Magus's ability to communicate, and to show us things, we have to look at what, like really what this figure is doing. But primarily, when looking at this card, it's not telling us to do what it does. It's telling us to see what it is. So let's look at what's happening. The Magus is juggling the 5 elements. So like I said, we've got earth represented by coins. We have fire represented by wands. We have air represented by swords. And we have water represented by cups. And we also, of course, have the ether represented by this winged egg. In addition to that, he's also juggling a pen and a scroll, which represents memory and record, or the word, written word. Now, the Magus's feet are winged, and there's a caduceus at his crown. These are both heavy symbols of Mercury, also known as Thoth, also known as Hermes, also known as Hermes Trismegistus, which is a very important name. Now, those figures are representative of the same thing, because in each mythological system that they correspond to, they are the things which speak on behalf of gods. So they speak on behalf of divinity. And they can transport themselves between the realm of spirit and the realm of earth. So this covers, oh, and also can't forget there's a scepter hanging from his fingertips, which is a symbol of authority and royalty. So this covers what the being in the card is doing and what he's directly engaged in. But from this, I think we can gain, well, there are a lot of things that we can gain from this. So as a way of fleshing the card out and other cards hereafter in this series, we will be approaching the Magus as a representation of that which does what the Magus does. So sort of an archetypal proposition system, if you will. So as the smiling juggler, the Magus is that which plays for the sake of playing. So again, totally satisfied with everything he's doing, doesn't have a problem with it, doesn't really seem to care. Now, as the smiling juggler who plays with the elements, the Magus is that which plays with the very fabric of reality for the sake of playing with the very fabric of reality. So it does nothing else and it wants nothing else as a figure. Now, as Mercury, Hermes, Thoth, or messenger of the divine, and as a being of authority, the Magus is that which plays with the very fabric of reality on behalf of supreme divinity. Now, another crucial aspect of this card is that the Magus is a performer. So in other renditions of this card, which we will have a look at here soon, the term magician is used, and that's a very crucial thing to keep in mind when looking at the Magus. The Magus is kind of, this might be a blinder meant to throw you off, just as a word. It's not very common in our lexicon. The 4 pages that I mentioned earlier that Crowley wrote on the subject, he titled The Juggler. So he didn't even call the chapter he wrote on his own Magus card The Magus. So he's a performer. And what do we know about performance? Performance is usually improvised or scripted, right? Now, that brings us to a potential fork in the road of this discussion. Is the Magus improvising, or is he performing a preordained set of tricks? So to answer this question for yourself, which I think you should answer for yourself, I've got my opinion. Just consider the nature of reality and the nature of nature. All things tend to grow from a preordained blueprint. All things follow patterns, even when they appear not to the naked eye. The Magus, I believe, knows his tricks and is performing them, on this stage of eternity. But fleshing that out too much will spoil the next steps in the major arcana that we're going to cover. Now that we have a sense of what the Magus is doing, let's think about where we are in the Fool's Journey, and that is stop number 2. At stop number 2, we've reached the first representation of the masculine principle, hereto referred to as force. Force simply implies the potency of movement. It is unmediated, unformed, and therefore limitless in and of itself. As for its position as the second card in the major arcana, the Magus brings us to perhaps the most important thing that it represents, which is duality, but not between 2 points. Where the Fool is the boundless nothing, the Magus gives us the boundless something. So it is force unmediated. It is the voice of creation, booming forth with such power that ethereality becomes reality. Just as all atoms spin, all matter vibrates, and the Magus is the force of that vibration. I believe that. Its purpose is singular, its orders are from on high, and its power is incomprehensible. Like, it has control of everything. How could something control everything? Well, it's the thing that creates everything. It's vibration. Vibration is at the center of everything in the known universe. So all things vibrate, and vibration impacts you. Now, if you just go into the sort of atomic structure of things, atoms are spinning. Even things which seem solid are made up of things that are spinning at such a high rate that, you can't really move through it. I don't think that's a very contentious claim to make about the Magus. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at this from another angle. We're going to go into sort of the human elements of it and talk about what it represents. To do that, though, I am going to go ahead and gather the rest of the Magus cards that we'll be looking at today. Now that we have some of my favorite representations of this card on the table, we'll go into the cultural element that the Magus represents, or could represent. I could be wrong. And that is dramatization. Human beings have always artistically recreated things just beyond our ability or our lexicon's ability to effectively articulate. Take love as an obvious example. So even the most verbose and talented speaker pales in comparison to the painter or the composer when communicating on the topic of love. The understanding of love simply can't be relayed without the use of art and dramatic modes of communication. Conversely, if we tried to describe the feelings we experience when hearing our favorite music using just language, the most articulate of us would only be able to convey an idea, sort of what the experience could be like. So our words are clumsy and often ineffective, but they're the best that we have in terms of supplying and receiving straightforward information. Consider the fact that spoken word could be as young as 60,000 years old, and that written language has only been around for about 6,000 years. So it's relatively new as far as things go. And it's evolving. It's going to continue to evolve. But it started somewhere, right? So how has humanity survived this long without the ability to use language? It's possible that early humanity had symbols for food, eat, go, stay, very early on. But what about the more complex things? So early humanity would, of course, paint. They would perform ceremonies and rituals, and when they accomplished something that gave them inexplicable awe in their ability to achieve, they would paint themselves and reenact events to show their families and tribes what happened. They danced and they played music. So they used the fundamental components of language as we know them today, which are just light and sound. You use light to read, to gather information from written word, and you use sound, of course, to intake spoken word. Now, you also receive information that's not necessarily in written form or spoken form all the time. So there's a language in the universe that is speaking to us and interacting with us at all times. So oscillations of these waveforms are the very fabric of all that we perceive. And the things that we perceive are so monumentally complex that even though we may share a language with those in our communities, we can never, ever relay our experience note for note to even our closest loved ones. The world is constantly making us feel things that we can't describe, and then the closest we've come to articulating those things is to make others feel things they can't describe through music, art, and drama. Unfortunately, however, something is always lost in translation. So, That brings us to a pretty crucial aspect of the Magus. Now, we'll talk about these here in a moment. That is the Ape of Thoth, right there in our corner. Now, this is not necessarily a separate figure, but this is more a shadow of the Magus. He is that which mocks the Magus' truth. He is that which loses things in translation. Now, to back up a little bit and just sort of expand on the idea of waveforms, we're going to look at these two cards. Now, this Magus by M.M. Moline from the Tabula Mundi is literally playing a DJ set. He is grabbing a whole galaxy, about to throw it on his turntable here. He's using the elements to convey something musical. So he is harnessing the principle of vibration, quite literally, in this card. This card unlocked a lot of it for me. I had a suspicion that the Magus was centered around the principle of vibration in the universe, but when I saw this, I mean, that was it. That did it for me. Now, Godfrey Dawson's The Hermetic Tarot gives us a really good example of sort of the dual nature of our experience with the Magus. Now, we have the Mercury figure right here, who is emitting waves. He's emitting vibratory waves. And those waves are interacting with the waves coming off of our magician's wand. And then, of course, he's got the elements surrounding him here as well. Now, these two Magus cards, try to imagine that these two figures are in a garden entertaining noblemen or noble women or both. Very similar in structure. They are at a table which contains representations of the elements. They're both holding a wand. These two are they're quite literally using vibratory waves to make things happen. And these two, it's just light. They're just showing you things. And the Magus in the center here, I think, was just Crowley and Lady Frida Harris trying to tell you exactly what was going on by showing you the immense power of this figure. Now back to the Ape of Thoth. So again, loss in translation, lies. This is often cited as a function or attribute of the Magus, that he represents the word and that sometimes the word is a lie. However, the figure in this card represents the foundations of reality that make lies possible. If our reality is a movie theater, the Magus is only the bulb in the projector. That's all he is. Everything else that comes after the Magus in the major arcana refines his power and tunes it. But this is just vibration. And there's really not much else going on. Now on to the final point of this discussion. We dealt with sort of the spiritual elements. We dealt with a cultural element. Now let's talk about the human element. What does this mean to you? Why is the Magus important to you? How does it impact you? So close to the beginning of the creative process laid out in the major arcana is the principle of vibration. So it's unmediated as it may be, what the Magus produces is that which underlies all communication. You have light, again, you have sound, again, but there might be more than what we can immediately perceive, at least at face value. But all influence on the human mind is conducted through oscillating waves that reach us and impact our perception. Most commonly, of course, through our eyes and ears. So as you listen to me yammer on about this on the device of your choosing, I am using sound to influence your thinking and hopefully help you understand something. Now consider for a moment that all information you receive is transmitted through speech and written word, and is then filtered and recycled through yourself and others, and that each thing you see and hear influences you to some degree, changes you, transforms you. Some of these things, of course, have very little influence on your perception, but others, they might change your thinking or change the quality of your experience in profound ways. So whether it's a news anchor announcing a vote in Congress, or a stranger's smile at a grocery store, or even God's rays penetrating dark clouds, this is the word in action. This is reality communicating information to us. This is the Magus at work. So the Magus's power is enormous. So is yours. When you speak, you are the Magus communicating. When you write, you are recording with his pen and scroll. When you sing, you are the Magus performing. It's said in Christian and Jewish tradition that the human being was made in the image of God, and that God used the word to crystallize our reality and create Earth's inhabitants. Insofar as we communicate, we create new realities. The word is the most powerful thing at our disposal. So those are my thoughts on the Magus. If you have sat through this entire video, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. I find these topics very interesting. Hopefully you do as well. I'm going to be putting out a video on the Priestess soon, and that's a doozy. So I hope you've enjoyed this. If I'm wrong on anything, again, I'll say it after every video. If I'm wrong on something, let me know. Be rude about it if you feel compelled to be rude about it. Anyway, look forward to hearing from you. This has been As Above, So Below Tarot. Peace out.